Hello and welcome back to a new video. In this video, we are going to learn about the trial of Radha Charan. The Supreme Court at Calcutta, which was created under the Royal Charter of 1774, quickly became known for expanding its powers and bringing Indians under the English law. This is module 1.2 for your reference for the semester 3 for second year BA LLB course. One of the best examples showing how the court functioned in its early years is the trial of Radha Charan. This case is important because it reveals how the Supreme Court enforced British legal principles on residents of Calcutta and how this created tension and confusion in the legal system. Who was Radha Charan? Radha Charan was a wealthy Hindu businessman living in Calcutta. He was engaged in financial transactions, money lending, and trade. Radha Charan was known among Indian merchants for his influence. Radha Charan was a permanent inhabitant of Calcutta, which made him fall directly under the Supreme Court's jurisdiction. Radha Charan's social status was high, but once the Supreme Court got involved, even the prominent Indians realized how powerful the new British legal system had become. Let us understand the background of the case. The case began when Radha Charan was accused of fraud and embezzlement. This involved handling money that belonged to another party, or misusing funds, or failing to return or properly account for money entrusted to him. This complaint was filed by another Indian merchant, not a British subject. This is very important because it showed that if both parties lived inside Calcutta, the Supreme Court treated them under the English law, even if they were Indians and even if their dispute was private. This placed Radha Charan directly under the court's authority. So how did the Supreme Court handle the case? The trial of Radha Charan shows the actual working process of the newly established Supreme Court, including its procedures, legal standards, and approach. First of all, there was application of English civil and criminal laws. The Supreme Court applied English law to the case, not Hindu personal law or other Indian customs. This meant that the standards of evidence, court procedure, rules about fraud, punishment were all based on English legal traditions. The Supreme Court applied English law to the case and not the Hindu personal law or other Indian customs. This meant that the standards of evidence, the court procedure, the rules about fraud and punishment were all based on the English legal traditions. Now, why was this important? Indians were not familiar with English law. They were suddenly forced to follow a foreign system that used different standards, which caused confusion and fear. Jury trial system used. The Supreme Court used the English jury system, which had a jury of British subjects, sometimes wealthy or elite Indians, but rarely. Indians were rarely appointed as juries. Judges who guided the jury based on the English case law, and the jury decided whether the accused was guilty or not. The Indian courts or adalats did not use juries, which was the courts set up by Warren Hastings. This was a completely new concept, and Indians had no idea how to present evidence or defend themselves according to the English jury standards. Strict evidence requirements. The Supreme Court required written documents, contracts, receipts, letters, or witnesses who testified under oath, cross examination, and proof beyond reasonable doubt. This was different from the Indian systems where oral testimonies, community reputation, local customary practices played an important role. Indians had to adjust to a new legal environment where paperwork and written records mattered more than relationships or agreements made verbally. Detailed court procedure and formal hearing. The court followed a formal trial structure. Legal arguments were presented by lawyers, examination and cross-examination of witnesses, closing arguments by attorneys, judges, instructions to the jury. Everything was conducted with strict adherence to English legal traditions. Now, why this mattered? Indians had never experienced such a formal court structure before. Even minor mistakes in documentation or procedure could go against the accused. After examining the evidence, the court held Radha Charan responsible for misappropriating money, not maintaining proper accounts, and betraying financial trust. The Supreme Court ordered fine to be paid and possible imprisonment, recovery of misused money, and investigation of his accounts and property. The punishment was based on English law, not Hindu or Indian customary law. This showed that the Supreme Court was ready to impose English legal consequences on Indians. Now, why is this case important? The trial of Radha Charan is significant for several reasons. It showed that even private disputes between Indians were brought under the English legal system if they lived inside Calcutta. The court could overrule traditional Indian methods and impose foreign laws. English law demanded written evidence, while Indian practices relied more on oral agreements. The company's Adalat systems used Indian laws, but Supreme Court used English laws. This led to confusion and conflict. Many Indian merchants realized that English law could be harsh and unpredictable. Cases like this led to criticism and the need to limit Supreme Court's powers, which resulted in the Act of Settlement of 1781. What was the impact of Radha Charan's case? It increased fear among the Indian merchants as they feared being dragged into the Supreme Court where English laws were applied strictly. It raised debates about jurisdiction, whether Indians be forced to follow the English law, and should the Supreme Court's power be limited. It strengthened the argument for reforms. The British Parliament realized that the court's power were too broad, which helped lead to the Act of Settlement of 1781. It showed how different the British legal system was. This helped India moved slowly towards a modern legal system, but also caused confusion and resistance. Radha Charan was, we're just doing a short recap. Radha Charan was an Indian merchant in Calcutta. He was accused of fraud and embezzlement. Supreme Court accepted the case because he lived in Calcutta. English laws were applied. Jury trial was held. Strict evidence rules were used. Punishment included fine, imprisonment, and recovery of funds. The case showed wide jurisdiction powers of the Supreme Court. This led to the criticism and it contributed to the Act of Settlement of 1781. Let us look at the mind map, the trial of Radha Charan. What was the background? He was an Indian trader. He was accused of fraud and embezzlement. These were the charges. The case was filed in Calcutta. What was the action taken by the Supreme Court? English laws were applied. The trial was by a jury and written evidence was used. Punishment was imposed. What was the importance of the case? First time the English laws were being applied on Indian inhabitants. The court had a wide jurisdiction, supremacy over the company courts as well, and it led to the reform of the 1781. What was the impact of the case? There was fear among the Indians in Calcutta. There was criticism of the Supreme Court, and it led to the Act of Settlement of 1781. Let us understand through MCQs what is our understanding of this particular trial of Radha Charan. The trial of Radha Charan was decided by Supreme Court at Calcutta. Radha Charan was accused of embezzlement and fraud. The Supreme Court applied which law in this case? English law. The Supreme Court accepted the case because Radha Charan lived in Calcutta. The trial involved which type of legal process? Jury trial. The Supreme Court demanded which type of evidence? Written records and sworn testimony. The punishment imposed by the Supreme Court included fine and imprisonment. The trial of Radha Charan showed the Supreme Court's jurisdiction over Indians living inside Calcutta. Which act was influenced by cases like Radha Charan's? The Act of Settlement of 1781. The trial highlighted conflict between the Company Adalat system and Supreme Court. That's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching and listening through. If this video helped, do consider subscribing and sharing the link with your friends. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.